Now this was a really fantastic project to take on. A world famous artist named Mackenzie Thorpe discovered sculpture studios on the internet. Now, coming from his drawings and his painting of the skipping twins, he's come up with Skipping Together, and he had a maquette made which stands about 12 inches tall, which now he wants us to reproduce at 15 foot tall for a children's hospital in Oklahoma. First of all, we start by gridding up the head. Once we've cut out the head from polystyrene, I'll start to use wire brushes and I'll start to brush down and create the actual form of the hemisphere. Then we create a front profile and a side profile of the figures and apply it to a block, and then in unison we cut out together going along the guidelines with a hot wire to create a cubist form. This is quite an important stage of the whole carving process, because any mistakes at this stage creates problems later on when we come to do the carving. Once we have the block carved out, I use a hot wire and I take off giant cheese type slices from the polystyrene, and once again use wire brushes and nail brushes in order to achieve the form. This is the best part of the job for me, the actual carving. I really love it. Once we finish with the carving side of it, we then have to protect the whole entire surface of the polystyrene with sticky back foil. This is an important process also, because if we start applying to the resin to the finish, and if there's a breach in the foil, then it will burn through. This entire process on one figure takes about 2 days to make sure it's absolutely there. Once we've completed this, then we take moulds from the surface, which we produce in 2 halves. Now, apart from being freehand, we also work from architectural drawings, and here we have the base, so we're following quite accurate guidelines. Once again, we create a polystyrene surface, cover the whole entire platform with plastics, and then create our moulds. Now here we have the head mould completed, and now we're getting on the inside and actually finishing the surface the best we can. Each process that we go through, we try and correct it until we end up with an absolutely lovely finish. Here we are now just laying up the moulds in fiberglass, and we repeat this process 4 times and then put the 4 pieces together. Now working on the base, which is again produced in fiberglass, and here we are trying to make sure that it's absolutely straight and the seam lines are good. And then we add the metalwork to the inside of the fiberglass, which again comes away in 2 halves. There is an awful lot of preparation with this. We clean up the surface, rub it back and clean it up until we're absolutely happy that the thing goes together nicely. Now here we have the welder applying the metalwork to the base. This is a very important part of it, as this is going to be the structure for the whole of the skipping twins. Once we have the 2 halves of the figures taken from the moulds, we apply the metalwork, and this is like a fretwork or a tree-like web of metalwork which takes to the whole of the stress and the structure and really just supports the fiberglass in its true form. Now here we have the metalwork for the ropes. We had to get these bent in several sections and then welded together. Here we are just lifting the heads on top of the body by using a winch. This is quite an important process, as we wanted to make sure the heads were positioned exactly right before we added the metalwork to the heads. We also applied a trapdoor to the head, and this would enable us to get in and add the metalwork to the head and connect it to the base of the figures. Here we are now applying a substantial base plate to the bottoms of the feet, which then in turn goes into the base unit. Once all the metalwork is welded inside the head, we actually add plenty of metalwork in order to spread load the fiberglass. So when we start to winch the figures up on top, there's absolutely no stress on the figures at all. Now one of the unsung heroes of this whole project is Susan Thorpe. She talked with the people in Oklahoma. She dealt with all the logistics like transportation, flights, hotels, and generally freed up Mackenzie to do what he's good at. So thank you very much indeed, Susan Thorpe, for doing this work. Now when we were doing the metalwork for the interior of the head, we were acutely aware of how much extra weight that we were adding, but we did want to make sure that we had belt and braces and nothing went wrong once we sealed the whole of the fiberglass together. Here you see us now attaching the skipping rope to the end of the arms before we put the hands on. Now when it comes to actually positioning the figures and standing them up and applying them to the base, we wanted to make sure that the metalwork was standing exactly true, so there was no stress in any part. Although the figures looked as if they were standing and leaning outwards, the fiberglass was, but the metalwork was standing true. I also employ a company called Fine Limit Welding. Now Martin has worked with me for about 20 years on and off now. He's absolutely fantastic. Now Mackenzie Thorpe actually come down to the studios. He chose the paints and the colours, and here he is applying the finishing touches to the bodies and the faces. I think it's good that Mackenzie Thorpe come down to the studio at the end of the day, because he could add the finishing touches to the work and also keep an eye on the quality of finish that he wanted to achieve. Sometimes when talking to a client, you think that you understand that they have conveyed the right information to you, but it's not until you work with somebody for a period of time that you really understand their work. When we disassembled the figures from the base unit, I wanted to lay them down and put them in some kind of cradle or crate, but I wanted to make it really efficient and as useful as possible. So I designed this cradle which could lift the figures up in situ and then release the cradle from the figures and then hoist the figures on top of the unit. It was vitally important that we didn't damage the figures during transit. So underneath the head and the bottom, I created these spoon type figures which would support the whole of the unit without damaging it or applying stress. Also I added these sponge pieces between the fiberglass and the figure in order to take the friction from it. The cradles or the base units for the figures actually were really efficient and worked well, as two people could manhandle them and position them inside the container. Also on the trapdoors we added metalwork, and we made sure these fitted exactly right, as we didn't want any kind of time issues on site. Mackenzie and I flew out to Oklahoma, and here we are in the foyer of the hospital. This is the base unit where everything is going to be applied to. Now, this hospital is magnificent, and it's very, very impressive. And I think Mackenzie's idea of having his sculptures in the foyer is to take the children's mind away from having the operation for a few moments. And if he achieves that, then he's done his job as an artist. Sue employed a company in Oklahoma called Allied Steel, and this man in red is the gang leader. His name is Mike Doherty, and he had a fantastic team to help us erect the sculptures. So thank you very much indeed. It was a pleasure working with you all. Now we wheel the trolleys around once the scaffolding is up, and we lift them up by the actual trolleys themselves, so we're not putting stress onto the figures. Attach a hook to the eyelets on the top of the heads, and then remove the cradle. We lifted the complete figures and attached them to the base. This process took about 5 or 6 hours to get them all bolted down and attached properly. Once everything was positioned and fixed together in place, Mackenzie and I went to work on making good the joints. Mackenzie was insisting that it had to look as if it arrived here in one unit with no seam lines at all. Mackenzie and I worked on site for about 4 to 5 days, making sure that the job was exactly as he envisaged it. This part of the job is quite laborious and quite hard work, but there's only one way to do it, and that's to get on your hands and knees and sand it, paint it, refill it, sand it, until Mackenzie was completely happy with the job. Now, after all the sanding process, we have Mackenzie here coming in and touching up the rope to the base unit, and once again he's overseeing exactly what he wants to happen and how he wants the work to look. Now, when the complete sculpture is finished, around the base of this there's going to be a reception desk. But for the moment there's nothing there, which has been fantastic because we can use the hoist and get up is unimpeded to finish the work. I think this particular project was a fantastic piece of work to undertake, and I would like to thank Mackenzie Thorpe and Susan Thorpe for engaging Sculpture Studios to undertake the work. It was a fantastic opportunity to collaborate with a fellow artist, and although Sculpture Studios has worked on projects of this scale and nature before, it was really nice to work with Mackenzie. And I wish you every success for the future, and if you have any more like this, Mackenzie, come back to Sculpture Studios.
Done.